big thank you to Memory Crystal and particularly to Leslie and Barbara who've helped us set up today. Memory Crystal has been huge supporters of us both. We are clients of theirs, but also in helping us to grow the business and supporting events like this. So thank you so much, Leslie. One of the things I think that's been quite surprising as we've researched the sector and prepared to build FEWE and launch it last year was that this is really new and innovative, what we're doing, and it really shouldn't be. I think to now have the support of businesses like Memory Crystal and a lot of the other businesses and brands that have collaborated with us on this report and the findings and the lobbying that we're doing is a really great sign, and it's a great sign of the progress that we're seeing to bring this into the mainstream. So I know that we're an audience of friends of FEWE here, but I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you a little bit about the brand, which is obviously very close to my heart and one of the reasons why we're here. So FEWE is a first of its kind female-founded menstrual cycle care brand, and our mantra of the brand is every phase for everybody. So it's a brand that is fundamentally built on data and insight and research. It's got a foundation, as I said, of research and of inquiry, and some of that we're going to be sharing with you today, which is contained here in this report, and I hope you can all take a copy of this. This is really the foundation of the brand, how we built the brand, the research that we did behind it. But I think what we realised is that this data has a much broader purpose and use, and that's what we want to share today here with everybody. But more than that, this is a brand that is built on the shared experiences of a group of women that I'm really proud to call my colleagues. And we're determined to reframe the way that we think about wellness and to build a brand that has products and services that really do cater to the actual needs of the consumers that we're targeting. And as we launch this report in the week of International Women's Day, and we'll talk a little bit more about the campaign that we've been running around that, I think it's important to reflect on what we think is the right way to build a brand. We're very much committed to building a responsible business. That's why we've embarked on what is a very comprehensive process of becoming a B Corp accredited business. We are now a B Corp pending business, which we're very proud to say. We are a business that is founded, run by, and majority owned by women, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is so important in this space as we go through the panel discussion. But we're also actively building our internal policies and the way that we work off the back of the data that we've collected from this report. We're still learning, we're trying to do better, and we're using the information that we've gathered here to build a better business for the people that work for us and hopefully share some of that with the rest of the community so that they can also take some learnings from that. Importantly, though, I think it's important to mention here that we're very laser focused on commercial success. And that is so central to bringing together the stakeholders and parties that we need to build success in this industry. Commercial success is central to that, and it's very much the focus of what we do. And while some of the statistics that we're going to go through today can sound quite alarming and are quite troubling, the overall message from this is a really, really positive one. And that's that there is a huge commercial opportunity here that has been missed in the past. And with commercial momentum, we can drive positive change for the consumers and the customers that we're targeting. So rather than just talking about change, we are actively making change, we are driving change in this industry, and we're very proud about that. So moving on to the findings of the menstrual revolution, I'm going to run through some of the key data points that we're going to talk about with the panel today and discuss what they actually mean. But let me read a few of those out to you. So we found during the course of our survey that 88% of our respondents had taken a sick day due to period pains or symptoms, and that 93% of our respondents didn't feel that their workplace considered the monthly impact of menstruation on their physical and mental health. Now, women make up over half of the UK workforce now, so this is a significant issue. And it's not just an issue for individual well-being, it's an issue for productivity, for efficiency, for growth. So something that we really need to be paying attention to. And when we dug a little bit deeper into this, we found there is also a significant knowledge gap and understanding gap among our target audience. So, for example, 51% of our survey participants were able to name just one of the hormones that impacts their menstrual cycle. 45% of our participants thought their menstrual cycle was just 1 week long. Now, this shows an extreme lack of knowledge and understanding of what is one of the most major and fundamental things that impacts personal well-being. So again, a major issue for our target audience. So whilst this education and knowledge base are clearly lacking and clearly need work and has formed a basis of part of how we've built this brand, we also found that there was a desire and a need for products and services to cater to this audience. So this was highlighted in our survey by the fact that 70% of our respondents were saying that there weren't enough products available for people experiencing menstrual cycle-related issues. And 63% of our respondents said they felt that perimenopause and menopausal products limited aspiration. They were not premium enough. So we're seeing our target audience here saying we want more to cater to these needs, and that's music to the ears of a consumer brand, right? There's an audience out there, they want products, and we want to give them to them. Beyond the results that we found in our survey, we've also drawn on research from other credible sources in the industry to build a bigger picture for this report. And that includes some data surrounding investment in female founders and femtech businesses and solutions, and the role that that plays in building the sector. So data from the British Business Bank shows that, and this really sticks in my throat, these ones, 83% of deals in that UK VCs made last year had no women at all on the founding teams. And for every £1 of VC investment that was invested, all women teams got 1 pence. The odds are pretty stacked against us, and it doesn't stop there. The censorship of women's health content on digital platforms is one of the biggest factors impacting the growth of the femtech industry. We drew on some research from the Centre of Intimate Justice that found that 100% of women's health companies that they surveyed had experienced Facebook or Instagram ad censorship. It's a problem that's really familiar to us as we're building FEWE. And moreover, vagina, hence why we've got this poster in front of us and some of the t-shirts we're wearing, vagina is one of the most flagged terms on Meta. And that's shocking. This is educational content that we're talking about. So in response to this, accompanying the launch of the Menstrual Revolution report, FEWE is leading an initiative to lobby Meta to change these discriminatory policies and to allow women's health content and educational content to live freely on their platforms. You'll see at the back of the room there is a copy of a very large copy of a letter that was sent to Nick Clegg yesterday at Meta, signed by an extensive list of brands, some of which are here with us today, urging Meta to do the right thing, to change the machine learning that is causing this injustice. And we're going to be pushing this initiative over the coming weeks and months, and we would be really grateful for your support in that. And we're going to talk to you a little bit more at the end and during the panel about how you can join us in driving some change in those policies. That is why we're wearing these t-shirts and kind of shouting the message from the rooftops. Which leads me to the aim of our panel today. So we're very privileged to be joined by this amazing group of women here today. All of them have unique and really valuable experience in this sector to bring to play. And they'll be exploring with us the commercial opportunities here, some of the challenges, but overridingly the opportunity here, and some of the findings that we've published in our report. And our aim from today is to really educate, inspire, and engage, and come away from here with some actionable points that we can all do to drive this really exciting industry forward. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Fran. Oh, sorry, didn't move the platform.
Hi everybody, I'm Fran, I'm the Chief Brand Officer at Cycle Brands and FEWE. Yesterday, myself and my team were on the streets of London kickstarting the Menstrual Revolution, getting kicked out of Meta. I didn't know I could run that fast. And kind of like banding with an amazing kind of cohort of partners to kind of launch the report, to kind of have a really serious conversation, which we're going to go through today, and also to start lobbying for positive action and change. Today, I'm joined by absolute powerhouses. I must just add that one of our panellists isn't here. She may dash in at any point, which only adds drama and excitement. But if she doesn't, we have today Katie Cotton, who is the CEO and founder of Luna Daily. She'll be explaining a lot more about that, and Chief Brand Officer at Charlotte Tilbury. Fabulous. I have the wonderful Becky Hawkins, who is women's health, HR and policy consultant. So she'll be here to talk all things workplace and policy related information. Rhiannon Jones, who I've known for a very, very long time, who is the co-founder of Ultraviolet Futures, femtech trend agency. And Rebekah Hall, my esteemed CEO. So we're going to cover 5 kind of major topics that are in the report that I'm sure you've all pored over and read at length. So we will start with kind of talking about defining wellness and what does that mean in 2022 and beyond. We're then going to kind of touch upon the cycle knowledge gap. So kind of on things that's really important to us and I know to a lot of the people in this room today. We're then going to talk about kind of the menstrual cycle workplace policy and a little bit more about what can be done to help employees and employers, touch upon investment in femtech, and then we're going to kind of end the proceedings talking a little bit about product and solutions. So I'm going to start asking some questions from my panel. So I think I'm going to start with Katie. But obviously, guys, all pitch in as appropriate on this one. So we're going to kind of start by talking about how we define wellness. Okay, so there's been a huge growth in the wellness industry, sort of the last couple of years. I think we're talking about sort of 44 trillion, 4.4 trillion business now. So kind of like, what do you think has happened in the last 5 years with your experience to kind of really grow that change?
Yes, so I suppose just very quick background because it's relevant to my response is that, so Luna Daily, we're a very new brand, but our mission is to make products for and conversations about womanhood as natural as they should be for women of all ages and stages. And we're starting by revolutionising what is still, for the most part, called today the feminine hygiene category. And I sort of put it in inverted commas because it's the absolute opposite of what we mean by wellness. And actually, as brands, what we stand here today wanting to make a change for. And I think the reason it's a $4.4 trillion category is that wellness can mean so many things to different people. But for me, the most important thing is it's an overall feeling of being well and actually an understanding that there are loads of different components that go into making you feel well. And so, you know, I think this report is phenomenal. It's taught me so much personally. But from an industry perspective, a category that we both, you know, sit comfortably alongside is that the intimate hygiene category has been dominated by menstruation products, which for the most part, people have sort of, if I say, you know, name a feminine hygiene product, they either say, you know, a tampon or a sanitary towel. And so most of the products available and the information available has been around just one element of menstruating. And actually what we're going to learn today, and I've learned, is there are so many other components apart from just physically bleeding on your menstrual cycle that incorporate part of this category. Yeah. And I'm so passionate about that as a whole because the thing we need to change about these categories is this feeling that there is a singular point of reference, but also there is a singular component that makes us feel well. And the more we can as women and the more we can as a whole generation understand the different components that go into what make us feel well. But I think the main thing that's changed is that actually we're starting to understand that. Yeah, and what started off as fads are now supported with like real hard life data to prove that actually wellness and positive wellness is the future.
Totally, I agree. And I think that's the whole point about the industry growing and developing and I think women being more in charge of their wellness. I think kind of on that point, Rhiannon, it'd be good to understand a little bit more about kind of your experience from a trend forecasting perspective, how wellness has moved from fad to every day and something that we're all taking a lot more seriously.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we were on that trajectory before the pandemic, but if we look at how the pandemic has changed the way we live our lives and how we think about our intrinsic values. We're no longer silent about the fact that certain narratives, certain policies, certain systems don't fit with us. So whether that's looking at Black Lives Matter or other big movements that have happened in the pandemic, you know, women have taken a step back and said, we're not comfortable and we're now really super, you know, vocal about demanding products that we need, about demanding policies that we need. So yeah, I'd say that's been the major shift post-pandemic. And yeah, I think we're ready for it. We've been ready for it for a long time, but finally we're seeing this cross-pollination of wellness into every aspect of life. You expect now your bank or your, you know, every interaction that you have as a consumer, you expect your wellness to have been considered through work, through fitness. And obviously for women, hormone care is a huge part of that. So they're tracking that at home, they're taking that information to their doctors. I say they, we, and that's the biggest difference. I guess we're now empowered by the data and empowered by other movements out there and seeing that, you know, our voice matters. And I think one of the strongest things that I read the other week is about, you know, the government wouldn't be trying to take away our right to protest if it wasn't so powerful.
Yeah, if it
so
wasn't
we've
doing
seen that in
something.
other aspects. So here we are, we've got a voice, we know wellness matters, we know our hormones matter, and we're not afraid to ask for what we want now.
Yeah, great. I think kind of there's something about like the kind of COVID era and us all being at home, working from home, meant that we understood our bodies on a such more intimate level. Because often you go to work, you're rushing around, you don't really kind of even realise all those things that you start to notice. And I think also people start to take wellness a lot more seriously because you had to look after yourself. Self-care became really important, and having a holistic way of looking at it became vital to kind of almost everyday survival. And I guess sort of, Rebekah, in terms of outside of obviously, you know, FEWE and Luna Daily and other exceptional brands that are in the audience, like who else have the kind of like you aspired to and seen to be really kind of leading that change?
I think I've worked in the wellness industry for quite a long time, and I think at a very basic level, the thing that we as individuals understand as wellness has changed quite significantly. When if you look back 5 years, I don't think menstrual care, sanitary products would ever been included in a wellness category, which was quite bizarre when you think about it, because it's such a fundamental part of being well. So I think that shift has meant that, certainly from my perspective, as I look at opportunities in the industry and look at where we're positioning brands, my view on the opportunities in wellness has changed quite significantly, you know, away from the sort of, as you said, the faddy matcha latte brigade, which is sort of very surface wellness, into actually what are the fundamental solutions, products, services that are actually going to change the way people feel on a daily basis. And that seems to be where wellness is going now. And you know the evolution of FEWE was actually looking really at what consumers want. That's what this report was about. So the brands that I kind of look at and aspire to are ones who are really finding those niches that are not serviced, but are actually using data to understand what consumers really want, and also sometimes delivering it a different way. So, you know, for example, in our category, it's been dominated by some dinosaurs of brands for the past 40 years. But what we started to see was some really young, exciting brands, people like Day, people like On, who are delivering same sorts of products, but in different ways. So going direct to consumer, updating the branding. And when I looked at the market, those are the people that I was looking at thinking, I like what you're doing. You're taking something which is already there, but you're doing it in a different way. You're doing it in a way that the audience is really responsive to. So I think those are some of the brands that I think have done a great job. Beyond that, I love looking at people doing new things, right, and finding areas that are not being serviced so far. You know, hopefully that's what we're doing in FEWE, but I see a lot of other brands like those on the panel doing that as well. Yeah,
definitely. I think there's been a lot of disruption. I think we've got Yoppie and Unfabled in the audience, so giving them a shout out because they're part of that movement. Yeah. Where we've kind of started to sort of look at categories in a very different way, and it's a little bit like your slogan, which is head, vulvas, knees and toes, knees and toes. It's great because we're starting to normalise the conversation, right? Because, you know, not everyone in the audience has a vulva, but quite a lot of you do. So we should be in a position that we can talk about it. And I think another area for me that I think is really exciting in terms of disrupting the wellness industry is a democratisation of it. So I love I'm an Aldi shopper through and through, obsessed. I love the fact that they've got a wellness aisle. I love the fact I can get a vitamin spray and sort of sleep gummies. And that kind of like what used to feel maybe the preserve of like, you know, a Goop or something that didn't feel accessible to everybody. It's really been kind of opened as a category that can serve all at very different sort of levels. And I think that for me is super, super exciting.
Yeah, we were talking before actually about the delivery apps. And for a while, I was kind of wanting to get hold of some of these amazing brands. Unfabled was kind of my go-to. But yeah, now knowing that I don't have to stock up in advance and I can literally within 7 minutes get to my door some of these amazing brands like Grace and Green and Sisters now are on Gorillas. I think that's really interesting kind of shift in things.
Yeah, like we should be able to talk about the products that we need, like, do you know what I mean? Like, completely.
Stop missing your vulva out of the conversation, right? It's like we just took a part of the body and we took it out of wellness because no one wanted to talk about it. So now, so now we'll put that back in the conversation and create products that actually address wellness needs that we have for the vulva.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to see how many times we can say vulva in the next 50 minutes. I'm going to go for around 100. Let's see. Jess, can you count? So next, we're going to talk about the cycle knowledge gap, obviously, because we've just done a huge report on it. We've obviously identified, and my own personal experience was, I was aged 40 when I realised that my disrupted sleep and mad anxiety was my pre-period symptoms, and to have lived with that for probably like a solid 20 years was kind of like quite infuriating. So there was all these things, and like every time I speak to anybody, we're always like, oh God, I don't know what's wrong with me, and then we come on and we're like, wow, and it's like, how many times are we going to say that, like in a space of 30 years? So I think we all know that there's this huge lack of education, and how I think our menstrual cycles affect our personal wellness, and I really do hope in the report that you can start to see the correlations that are far more reaching than maybe the traditional kind of cramping or PMS symptoms, etc., that we tend to associate with our cycle. But I guess I'm kind of interested. I'll start with Rhiannon, and then I think I'll ask Becky as well.
This is going personal stories.
We can go personal, but why do you think this lack of education exists? And how can this be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, there's a massive stigma out there, for starters, so that stops kind of people having conversations with their kind of daughters right from the start. I know my mum tells me this story, and has told me the story since I was little, about how when my grandmother came on her period, she literally thought she was dying. She had no idea, no one had ever spoken to her. So from my mum's perspective, she was quite keen that we didn't have the same experience. So it's so reliant on what you're being taught at home, because there isn't that education in schools, which we know is improving. Some amazing people, Luna app, trying to improve kind of the education aspects of things. But at the end of the day, it's no one taking responsibility. And now we're seeing brands stepping up and kind of filling that gap, and social media doing an amazing job. So yeah, it's a positive future, but a dark past.
Yeah,
On the spot.
I think in terms of education, there is some. I've got a teenage daughter, and it is there to some extent, but what I particularly notice is that I don't know where it is with boys as well, and I think that's really important because it's normalising the experience. I just wanted to share one experience that I had in the workplace actually, and I've got huge respect for this person. So I worked with a director who chose to use the menopause 5 times every day into any normal conversation, and that for me was a really powerful thing to do, to normalise our experiences, to educate people, and he did his little bit to change culture, and I had a huge respect for that. So, and I think that's one thing practically we can all do to try and make things better in terms of education.
Katie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I also think we're going to be the generation that does it, because if I'm totally honest, I didn't know a lot myself. I mean, we've, like these guys, we've done lots of research, and we found that 87% of women were not taught about intimate care at school. It's great, it has now been added to the curriculum in September 2020, but it's at quite a top-line level. And so, 80% of women weren't taught about it at school. 80% of women couldn't accurately locate the vulva, and most of us, I mean, myself included, until about 3 years ago, I just called it my vagina. And really embarrassingly, the first ever bit of research I did for Luna Daily, I said in our survey, how often do you wash your vagina? And quite a few women came back and said, well, never. And I was like, well, that's a bit weird. I just all sort of thought we all did, give a bit of a wash. And then I was like, ugh, because you shouldn't be washing your vagina because it's totally self-cleaning. It's really clever. Never needs any product, never put any washing products inside your vagina or water, anything. The vulval external skin is actually quite similar to skin under our arms. So if you want to give it a wash, great. But even I, as somebody that was entering into a category that I thought I was pretty well educated on, I made a mistake. And I was in an interview last night where she asked me, so why is it that the vulva just went missing? We were just never taught it. And I don't know why, and none of us were taught about it. But I really think we're the generation that's going to change it, because if I speak to my mum, she wasn't taught about it. And so actually we didn't have women outside of the education system campaigning for change, and we didn't have women outside of social media campaigning for change. But because we as women are understanding a lot more, I think we've got so much better a chance to get it added to education policies and to get it added.
Our GPs as well. I've been playing a fun game over the last year of what can I throw at my GP? And someone was telling me all the things you can get on prescription. You can get lube on prescription. I had no idea. So I was like, hey, Mr. GP, can I have some lube? And he was like, let me check my book. And he was like, turns out I can. So yeah, being able to advocate for ourselves is a really powerful way of then changing the healthcare system as well.
And in your report, you referenced Maria Caulfield, who's the new women's health ambassador, because they're doing a new report this spring, which I think is a really good point, Rhiannon, because we've got a vulval dermatologist as part of our kind of Luna Collective, and she was saying that, you know, for example, vulval dermatology is not taught specifically if you enter into dermatology. So she sort of became an expert because she ended up being the person people would go to, and she ended up seeing lots of women with vulval skin conditions. But similarly, menopause is not currently taught on the GP curriculum. Because it's such a short curriculum, they've said they haven't got time to teach it, which is bonkers, because half the population are pretty much guaranteed to go through menopause, and lots of those women will need to see a GP about HRT, about, you know, have they got enough testosterone levels, loads of things talked about in the report, yet GPs aren't equipped with it. Like, it's bonkers.
They don't understand enough about it.
There's a role that retail plays in this as well, though. Like, if you walk into a shop, you'd be forgiven for thinking none of these things are issues, because there isn't anything there to deal with them. So, like, you're guided by the products and services that are available to the issues that. So you'd be forgiven for thinking, well, actually, maybe it's just me, because no one else is experiencing. Because if they were, there would be something there
exactly. It would be
to deal with
there,
this,
you'd
right?
be able to hear about it on social. And I think, and I think that's the whole point. Is like, where do we think that responsibility lies? Like, you know,
it's interesting because it's different in the US to the UK as well. So we're seeing the US is slightly further ahead. They're a little bit more there with hormone concierges and kind of places that you can go for impartial advice, or, you know, and that's how I learned about how to request lube from a GP, was because actually I saw hormone concierge. So I think if we look to the US, they're a bit further ahead, and hopefully we'll start seeing that here, or someone in this room can invent something here, maybe.
Rebecca, you're totally right, though, that, you know, if I was to walk in I won't name names, but a traditional drugstore in the UK, typically you've sort of got menstruation products which typically women need once a month, next to sort of lube, menopause, incontinence, fertility maybe, and sort of all just shoved together in a corner. No one really, maybe, you know, menopause on the end now. But what we are seeing is some of the online players really making a change, and that's partly because the shopping experience is different. We don't have physical shelves we have to stand in front of. So a great example is Sephora, I think, are really leading the way, because rather than having a feminine hygiene category, they've recently launched, you know, really quite extensive intimate care and sexual wellness category, and what they've decided to do is just place them right next to face moisturisers. So as you're scrolling through your feed on Sephora, you know, you can see a face moisturiser next to a vibrator, next to a product that might help, you know, reduce menstruation cramps. And that, for me, is like a retailer that's really putting a foot in the forward in terms of changing.
Because you're totally right, because it's all part of this holistic wellness, right? It's like kind of like, you know, being able to have a serum for my face is no different to wanting a serum for my vulva, which you've all got in your goodie bags, by the way. And I think, like, why aren't we thinking about all of these things in completeness? And I think one of the things that we touch upon a lot, Rebecca, is kind of it starts at school age. Like, you know, it is great, like we were saying, that in 2020 it's gone on the curriculum, but it's so light touch. You know, before that you might have been told there was a tampon and that you get a period once a month and that was it. But also, and we'll go on to this next, it is about the role of kind of social media and communities and places you can have these safe, open conversations. And then also retailers, right? Because it's exactly that. If you walk into a store, and you're probably sold loads of products. They probably really want you to buy skincare. They've got loads of products for your hair. They've probably got loads of weight loss things and teeth whitening and all these other products. But are they serving that other wellness need? You tend to think, oh, obviously it's no problem then. So maybe I'm on my own thinking that this is an issue. And that kind of drives the kind of taboo nature of it, which is one of the things that the Women's Health Strategy is really key on, is they want to stop this kind of taboo nature around conversations around women's health. Which I think sort of leads us on a little bit to kind of cyber censorship. Obviously, it was a very important topic to us yesterday, and very fortunate that a lot of people in this room and sort of two of the panellists have kind of joined us in signing the letter. Rebecca, I'll start with you on this one actually, because obviously it's super close to our hearts, and then lead on to the guys in terms of like why, like again, like why do we think this is such a problem, and why is it so important that this is challenged to kind of make positive change?
Look, I think we live in a world that we all know now where digital platforms, social media plays the biggest role in information dissemination. So to have the largest ones of those available in Facebook and Instagram, and there are others, I mean, we're talking specifically about Meta, to have those barred from disseminating information on most women's health topics is ridiculous. and it's archaic, and it doesn't make any sense. It's discriminatory, and it does so many different things to place women at a disadvantage and to take us backwards in terms of all of the work that we're trying to do. So from a societal perspective, this is a big issue. I mean, it's a big issue for us commercially and as a brand, but from a societal point of view, it's a massive issue. And I think for someone like Meta to come out and make this change, and we understand this to be an issue around machine learning, around algorithms rather than intentional policy, and we'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that. But for someone to come out like Meta, to come out and make a change on this would be a real statement about the importance of women, of women's health issues, which is what we really need now to galvanise this industry. Why this campaign is so important to us, because it's not just about us being able to advertise for FEWE, which, by the way, is challenging, right? You cannot. One of the reasons vulva is not the most censored word on Meta is because no one knows what a vulva is. If they did, then it probably would be the most censored word on there. Vagina is the most censored, one of the most censored words on there. Yeah. But one of the reasons it's so important, yes, we want to be able to promote our products and our brands, but we also need to be able to use these information and education platforms to teach women of all ages, including our ages, about these serious issues that can help to prevent illness, can help to improve wellness, that can help to improve society. These are really important key issues. So this, if this report for us is about building the brand, and it's about building commercial momentum, but it's also about making this change, and we're really committed to trying to pursue this over the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more experiences?
Yeah, I think, being a future forecaster, trend forecaster, we're really focused on where, what this looks like as a trajectory and where we're going next. And Meta have a huge stake, not only in the metaverse, but also in healthcare. They're really serious about going down the healthcare route. So if they can't get their policies right on a social media platform, how are they going to get that right when they're tackling healthcare? So let's tackle this now at the point that it's at, and it's hugely important even now, but also going forward, what's their healthcare metaverse going to look like if they can't say the word vagina? It's not very promising.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really agree with everything that the guys at FEWE are trying to do with this revolution is to normalise the conversation around the vagina and the vulva, and that doesn't mean that everybody has to be really comfortable or even want their social feeds to be filled full of vaginas or vulvas.
Don't follow us if you don't want to see it.
But actually also so many of the messages that you put out are not just about that. And so for us, normalising the conversation doesn't mean that everyone has to be ready to shout and talk about their vulva. And actually not singling it out. So all of our products actually are for your vulva and everywhere else, so intimate skin and everywhere else. So just trying to normalise it as one of our other body parts. But the reason it's so important to normalise it, the reason we can all just say it without even thinking about it now is because it is so normal to us. And the health benefits you just talked about are so important. So our partner charity, the Lady Garden Foundation, they're one of the leading gynecological charities. And the reason we partner with them is that 1 in 3 women are not going to their cervical smears because they're saying they're too embarrassed. And 2 in 3 women will not say the word vagina to a doctor. And, it gives me goosebumps. It's devastating that one of the only preventable cancers we have is through a cervical smear here in the UK. And people aren't going because they're embarrassed. And so, the more we can normalise the conversation in school, in social media, the more actually when it is really serious and you do need women to go, actually will have an impact. So if anybody is a woman or knows a woman that might be due their smear or is not sure, give your GP a ring and get it done, because it's devastating that cervical smears are at an all-time low, literally today, a 20-year low than they've ever been, despite us having more information than ever.
It's life-threatening stuff, right? It's literally life and death stuff, and it is hugely important, and it needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go to the next topic, Ria Cartwright has arrived.
What an entrance. What an entrance.
That was so exciting.
My mic on, sorry, I've been on mute, which is probably a good thing, because I've been sweating it.
Oh, that's how I feel actually.
Excellent hosting.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, Ria.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. We explained that you might be joining mid-panel, which actually would add to the excitement of the event. So I think it's actually a really nice interval. So I'm just going to introduce who Ria is, and then we'll go on to the next section. So Ria Carter Cartwright, apologies, is the beauty director at Stackwell, which is where we started the Menstrual Revolution yesterday, which was incredible.
I saw all the pictures.
Yeah, it was really well received. An amazing community of women, for women, but also does a lot of brand consultancy, journalism work, so like really well known in the beauty space. So thank you so much for joining us. Great. So the next thing we're going to discuss right now is the menstrual cycle in the workplace. So I'm going to start with Becky. So in your experience, Becky, like, are you seeing an increase in employers starting to think about the menstrual cycle as part of HR policy?
Yes, I think the one that we're specifically seeing the most is having a standalone menopause policy.
Yeah.
So that's the one I would say more, we're getting more requests from. But I think the other request that we're getting is to how you consider all women's issues as part of standalone policies. So how you consider fertility, miscarriage, time off if you're unwell because of your period, how you infiltrate that into your existing things like special leave policies and absence policies.
Yeah, and I do think I agree that kind of like the menopause movement that obviously feels like it, I mean, it's obviously for a long time, it feels like it was really supercharged last October. Yeah. Like, you have seen huge leaps and bounds in this and people working really quickly towards it. We're part of GenM, who actually are sort of leading menopause kind of sort of lobbying group, and they're working with employees and employers to kind of like create better solutions and better working environments, and they've done some incredible work in the last 6 months, which has been really exciting for us to see. And I guess kind of Becky, and then I'm actually going to ask Ria, because I'm thinking a little bit around kind of like how this benefits women in the workplace. So like, in your opinion, like how seriously are employers taking this, and what are the benefits that they are seeing from this kind of change?
So I think there's a varying level of how seriously people need to take it, but I think the point that needs to be made is that to ignore these issues just simply, apart from compassionate grounds, they need to be taking it seriously. It doesn't make good business sense to ignore the issues. Yeah. But if you do take the benefits and make action and make change, then you will see improvements. You'll see improvements in your absence rates, in staff engagement, in your employer brand, all of those things. So it's really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess kind of like Ria, like in terms of, I know at the moment actually, Stack are doing a lot of work around women's health policy and getting Stackwell memberships. Isn't that your big kind of International Women's Day drive? As Bella was telling me yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of content on like medical misogyny and the way that affects women all over the world, but particularly in the workplace. And I think obviously we're very lucky to have a female founder, but I think ultimately the language around, people that menstruate, and I'm also very conscious actually to not always use the word women, so it's incredibly inclusive. It's affecting 50% of the workforce, so we need to start caring, because ultimately that spectrum of side effects, is whether the kind of hormonal changes that one goes through for such a monumental like time period of your life. And whether that's, at one end of the spectrum having low energy, to the other end, having nausea and, consistent bleeding and what comes with that is devastating. And ultimately, I think it's going to affect your productivity. It's going to affect the way you look after yourself, show up for yourself and others and your team. And it can't be ignored, and we have to start challenging it. And ultimately, for us to see, I think, long-lasting change, we need some kind of policy that actually makes it, like it's okay to have a sick day rather than being like embarrassed. Yes. Like, oh, what do I do? Text my boss saying I'm on my period? Like, maybe not,
No, I totally agree. And I think with our survey, I think it's about 93% of people felt that you can't call in or you can't talk about the fact that you're ill off the back of your menstrual cycle, but you should be able to normalise having a sick day as that being whether it's cramping, headaches, whatever, and being able to kind of have a more inclusive conversation, because sort of alongside that, there's also like really powerful sort of, I suppose, points to understanding your cycle, because not every phase of your cycle is bad, guys. Like, you have two phases where you are pretty much superhuman. So in terms of being really smart about when you schedule the big meetings, like when are you seeing that, you've got a pitch, you really want to win it, when you can come and really bring your best creative self, understanding your cycle, and then understanding a little bit about how you can utilise in the workplace actually can make pandemic, I think people do a much better job at work and actually, like saying, kind of increase productivity and build a workforce that are genuinely very happy. And I think sometimes, a lot of the times when we have these conversations around menstrual cycles and sort of education, it's remembering that there's also lots of positives out there that come from all of this. Like, you know, it's super powerful what we've got.
I think there's a point here, Fran, as well, about encouraging employers to approach this in a positive way. Rather than being fearful that they're doing the wrong thing, actually being collaborative, talking to your employees. I mean, we've done a lot of work with Becky on how we do that internally. And it sounds silly, we're a women-founded business, we're a mostly women team. We should know what we're doing on this, right? We don't necessarily. So, you know, we've done a lot of work with Becky on what are the practical things that we can do. How can we be collaborative with our team about the things that actually make a difference to them? And I think if employers know that there are going to be benefits for this for them, and there's going to be positive effects for them, and they're going to have a happier workforce, and as you said, Becky, improve their brand, it's about encouraging employers to do this work.
And I think the point you've made there is really important. So unless you engage with your staff, you risk giving them what you think they want as opposed to what they actually want. So that's really important. And if I can just give an example, if you're looking at something like the menopause, employers have a duty of care to provide a safe working environment. It's important to recognise that. So if you have a policy, one of the things that I would advise in terms of a standalone policy is have guidance on how to have a confidential conversation. Maybe have a risk assessment, look at what symptoms people are having and how that impacts in the workplace. And then there are a number of reasonable adjustments you can make, and they're really simple, but just to highlight what those are, making sure people have access to cold water, appropriate access to toilet facilities, having a room that's temperature controlled, access to a fan, maybe having somewhere where people can change if they need to, store clean clothes, flexible working practices. And I just want to make the specific point, if there's a sudden dip in performance of a member of staff, giving consideration to whether that is related to menopausal symptoms. And there is some case law around, in severe cases of the symptoms, they could constitute a disability. And where that happens, where a health condition could constitute a disability, there are additional obligations on an employer, and it's important for them to recognise that. And the other point I just want to make in relation to that point is that I'm not aware the same case law is there around periods. Yeah. However, what I want to just share with you is what a definition of a disability is, and that's a mental or physical impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative impact on your ability to carry out day-to-day activities. Now, I would question whether that should apply, but irrespective of whether it actually does apply, we need to be doing the right thing, and the right thing is listening to our staff, putting the changes in and supporting them. And I just think that's just a really important point to make.
Something I think is so brilliant about this booklet is that I feel like I can literally use this as a tool book for my team, because I didn't know lots of the stuff in here, and I think something I'd love to see more businesses doing is actually sharing their policies, that particularly for startup brands where, you know, budgets are tight, we have small, very fast-growing teams, often very hard-working teams, often in our case, over-indexing in women. I'd love to see more brands sharing their policies, that lots of big brands have come out and said, you know, we've got an amazing reproductive policy for women that incorporates not just mat leave, but all the other things we've talked about. But I'd love people to be more open in sharing those policies, so we, you know, it's not a competition, and so that we can actually all benefit from them.
And I think that's really important, because I think sometimes people find it really difficult to raise those topics, and very specifically the words themselves, which we've kind of raised. So by having the policies, you're raising awareness and demonstrating that it's acceptable to use those terms and that you take it seriously.
I had one of our lead designers is perimenopausal, and so she's really tracking her cycle. And she's basically worked out, she said, you know, we were chatting over a cup of coffee the other week, and she worked out there's a week of the month where she hates her husband. She's like, and literally, I cannot be in. But she's like, I hate my husband for this week. Then this happens, and she's worked out that like 5 days of the month, she's wide awake from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. and she's like super productive. And she's like, that's what I need, those 5 days. I need you to give me all this like really complicated design work. Then there's 4 days where like she's probably her best to be presenting to people. The rest of the time she's like, honestly, don't let me present. And it's the reason I'd love people to share policies is that I've got that information. It's made me think, gosh, how can I completely change all of our diaries? Like if that's what works best for her, which ultimately is going to mean it's best for me from a business perspective, how could we, you know, we already operate the 4-day week, but how do we like take it to the next level and actually completely operate around women's cycles, and stuff like this is so important.
Well, I mean, not that we want to plug the report too much, Katie.
Oh, I'm doing it for you.
That was one of the aims off the back of this, that there are some things we wanted to achieve, and one of them was to inspire employers and employees to raise these topics, but to share policies, to make it easier to make change, so that we can actually see some movement in this, not just talk about it, but actually see it happen in real life.
Take the responsibility off the employers. I would compare it to like with mental health. So you expect to be able to talk about mental health with your team and have a good relationship, but you also look to people like businesses who are specialists in this. So you might put Headspace on the benefits list, or kind of have a kind of specialist mental health charity that you work with. And I think we're seeing the same with menopause. There's not menopause specifically, but all kind of women's health. There are a lot of B2B businesses out there now that are stepping up and creating platforms. So if you are nervous as an employer, speak to somebody like Alanza Health or Raise HR, who are specialists in helping kind of become a bridge between the employee and the employer to navigate through really difficult times. You know, you do not have to be an expert on miscarriage as a line manager. You just need to know how to support them, even if that is a third party or another platform.
The expert that can help. And I think, like Rebecca was saying, a lot of what we're aiming to do is sort of look at how we can take the findings of the report to support people with kind of workplace policy, or to kind of go and speak to businesses so that they can start to understand, because the kind of like the ramifications, both good and bad, of this, so that policy move can start to change. And I think, you know, one thing that we're very fortunate at Cycle Brands, obviously because we care so much about it, is we've got some quite exciting policies that we've brought in that probably are a little bit kind of like more future facing, but because we've got such in-depth knowledge, like we've been able to do that. So shout out to Hannah for delivering a lot of that great work. Excellent. Okay, so the next section that we're going to chat about is the investment in femtech solution, or rather the lack of investment. I was going to kind of kickstart this with Rhiannon, and then I think I might move over to Ria, because I know that you work with a lot of femtech brands. You do a lot of kind of trend reporting for them. You understand this landscape really well, and I know that one of Stackwell's missions is all about financial empowerment for women, and you do a huge amount of work around kind of investment and helping people get investment, because you understand how challenging it is for women. So I guess kind of like starting point, Rhiannon, why is investment in female founders and female-focused offerings so low? Like, there are some sort of stats that kind of Rebecca's been through earlier, kind of discuss on this. Like, from your perspective, understanding the landscape, like what's going on out there?
I mean, the history is against us. I think that's the first thing. Society in general is quite messed up. So you're just seeing what's playing out in the investment world as a reflection of all of the discrimination against women. So that's kind of like the biggest thing that we all know. I'd say for women, I mean, something that Stackwell highlights a lot is we haven't got that kind of men's club backing where we know how to talk to investors. There's, you know, you're not often talking to female investors on the other side of the table either. Yeah. So what we work with brands a lot on as a trend forecasting agency is really helping to tell the story about why women need this and what the commercial opportunity is. So, you know, something we know that our founders hear a lot when they're pitching is, hasn't this been a problem forever though? So why do we suddenly need a solution? Like, you know, women have had periods for years, so why do they suddenly need your vulva serum? So it's helping them understand the societal shift and why we need it, why now, and that timeliness. That's a really key piece, I think, for investors. I know you mentioned before about how it can be useful at tapping into investors' personal experience. Go speak to your mother, go speak to your sister. But we also need to get them to understand that this is, it's not just based on personal experience, you know, it's not just, so I think a lot of founders lead with that. Here's my personal experience, and that's not always the best commercial opportunity.
Hard stats.
Yeah, so we try and build that future vision and say, you know, by the time we're launching this product in a year's time, in 2 years' time, this is what society will look like, and this is the need there. So yeah, it's building that big picture, I guess.
I was going to say, I agree with Rhiannon in that respect. There's a lot of it's like the language around it. So you know, women, I think that narrative and storytelling is such a crucial part of any business, but actually for an investor, I want to know I'm going to put this in, and then in a few years, I'm going to get that out. So I think a lot of the work that we do is empowering women, because actually if you're not comfortable talking about finances in your personal life, which so many women aren't, and we're locked out of so many financial institutions because, as Rana mentioned, it's been like a boys' club for centuries. If I can't talk about my personal banking, how am I going to do that on like a business level? So I think that's a lot of what we do, is breaking down a lot of the jargon that's just there to lock people out in the first place. Once you feel empowered talking about money, then actually it allows you to go, I think, on your investing journey, you know, so much more, and have the confidence to show up, because as Rana mentioned, you'll go to a pitch and there's not going to be many women on the other side, right? Like the funding statistics are so poor. And I think ultimately it's, you know, everything comes down to economic power, because that's what brings change. So I think quite often, I think when I see female founders, it's not they don't want to become a billionaire so they can, you know, buy nice clothes. It's actually they can create long-lasting change, because when women have economic power, it changes like communities long-term, and quite often for the better, and there are statistics to prove that. So it's crucial that whether it's, you know, femtech or you know, fast-moving consumer good, really whatever the case is, that money almost goes a lot further, because there's almost a more considered route about where that profit goes afterwards, and that's crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Rebekah, any experience you'd like to share from the world of investing?
Well, look, I think there is certainly, I agree with what you said, and I think there is definitely one of the reasons is a complex reason why women are underfunded. I think one of the reasons is, in general, historically, women haven't been as comfortable talking about these things and comfortable pitching in the way that the kind of industry is set up. However, what I will say is that I'm pretty financially literate. I spent 10 years in investment banking. I'm an accountant. I've raised money for countless businesses. This is the hardest money I've ever raised. So there is something else going on here as well. This is not, and I read something the other day, someone was saying, women founders don't need more mentorship, we need more pounds. And I find it somewhat patronizing that as a woman founder, I get offered to be mentored. I don't need to be mentored on how to raise money. I've done it many times before. We need the landscape to shift a little bit around appetite to invest in female-founded businesses and female-focused propositions. You know, I've got loads of anecdotes from the experience of what we're doing here about some of the ridiculous things I've heard from people across the table about investing in female-focused propositions, which I've never heard before in non-female-focused propositions. So I think my attitude to what's going on has changed somewhat over the last 10 years with a difference of experience that's there. However, there are positives, I think. The fact that we're here talking about this, the fact that we as a business have a portfolio of brands, this is the most exciting brand in our portfolio and the one that gets the most attention. There are reasons for that. The landscape is shifting. I think investors are starting to realise that this is a big area of white space, which is what you want, right? And what we're going to them with are stats. We're going to them with data that shows there's a really big opportunity here that is untapped. So I think we are seeing a shift. We are seeing traditional investors start to come to the table. We are seeing great strides in the males in our population wanting to talk about these things and make money from these things. So I think there are green shoots there. I think women need to get comfortable about talking about money and making money. It's not, I've always said it's not a dirty thing. Yeah. Like, I didn't do this as a philanthropic endeavour. I'm
laughing because I used to do this chat for the staff, and I was like, guys, it's okay, so I want to be rich. Yeah, like, I actually want to be rich. Like, sorry, but like, I don't want to be broke, and that's okay. Like, I actually want to make a ton of money.
The investors want to be rich. So going in there with a philanthropic story or in a personal story, it's not the whole picture. You know, it's not X Factor. They don't want your.
You don't need the share, right?
It's not going to win.
As much as we're doing the good work here, this is not philanthropy. This is about making money and commercial endeavour for us, and that's not wrong. But the two can go together. And I think there is a bigger picture here about the way that modern business and modern brand building. The right and smart way to do that is to build responsible businesses, because that's what consumers engage in. That's increasingly what investor community engage in. So there is a way of those two things marrying together. So yeah, I think there is a problem here. It's a frustrating one for me. As I said, I've heard some ridiculous things said to me over the course of the last 6 months while we've been raising money. But we need to get out there. We need to be visible. we need to be having these conversations about, and we need success stories, right? We need to see, we saw one this morning, right, Jude, the incontinence brand has just raised, I think it was the single biggest sole female founder pre-seed funding raise at 2 million, which is ludicrous if you think about it, but great that they've raised money, great that that's prominent. Let's not make it just prominent on International Women's Day, let's make it prominent success stories throughout the year. There should be loads, so I want to come back here in 6 months' time telling everyone how we smashed the doors off and we're making loads of money and we've got 25 million through the door. Those are the stories that we need to be hearing to bring this into prominence.
Absolutely. Okay, right. So on to the last section of the panel today. So now we're going to talk about products and solutions. So Katie, I'll start with you and then I'll head over to Ria as our resident beauty expert. So from the kind of an outsider perspective, well, you're not exactly an outsider now because you're in it. There's this huge lack of products and kind of gaps in the market. Why do you think that like the consumer sort of packaged goods market has been so slow to get on this trend? And are you starting to see any green shoots everywhere?
I think the reason the trend has been slower is because of exactly what we've been talking about today, which is there's not been a conversation. And so actually it's not been until recently that actually consumer conversation has driven trend reports, which have driven ultimately, understanding that there is an opportunity for the products. But I also think one of the positives to come out of COVID is it's fundamentally changed a lot of how all of us are working, but also the entrance of new brands. So there's never been more indie brands entering into the market across, beauty, wellness, cosmetics. And what those indie brands are doing is that looking at things differently on every single angle. So whether it's direct to consumer, so I've seen more ASOS packages than ever before during lockdown. Maybe it was actually a boredom. I mean, my final tenureship at Charlotte Tilbury, we exceeded our pre-COVID forecasts during lockdown, despite 65% of our business traditionally being through bricks and mortar. And so there is no doubt that direct-to-consumer and the growth of that channel and that channel that is here to stay has offered a huge platform for independent brands to develop into these categories. What was the original question now? I've forgotten.
Just like where we're seeing the movement. And it may be in bricks and mortar. Like, are you seeing any kind of like trends there?
Yeah, I think certainly because us going back to bricks and mortar in London, it does sort of feel like, particularly with everything else in the news, that COVID is sort of gone so quickly. Like we're not talking about it anymore. And so the positive of that is that shopper behaviours are returning. So absolutely bricks and mortar. I think still from a category perspective, and that's whether we're talking about period products, whether we're talking about intimate hygiene, whatever, I still think there's a big way to go to not have these products marginalised into those categories. That my vision is that all of us as brands sit alongside each other and we all just sit under one holistic category as products for women, rather than having them in these very specific niche categories. Because also it slightly misses, if we think about menopause, 55% of women during menopause will experience dry skin, and so are looking for products that help with lubrication, that help with plumping of skin, that help with deep moisturisation. But there's also loads of the population that just have really dry skin. And so it's not just as single-minded as let's create just products for people in the menopause. It's got to be really authentic products that actually are really fulfilling a consumer need and talking to consumers in the way that they want to be spoken to.
No, absolutely. And I guess Ria, with her finger firmly on the pulse of mainstream retail, what are you seeing in terms of like, kind of, I suppose, like, this range of like products, like as a category? Like, are you starting to see this grow and there be more interest?
I remember like working in Space NK like 10 years ago, and there was a brand that launched that was all about kind of hormonal changes in the skin, and like no one touched it. So number one, like, I think people were so like, why would I need to change my skin based on my cycle? It was such an unheard of concept. And I do think in some respect it's whether it's lockdown or just the kind of general slowing down of life and people having, I think ultimately it's having the time to realise the changes. Quite often with skin, and on my shop floor days, I was like, you tell me about your skin, and people don't know, because we were so busy all the time, and they actually didn't realise, they had no idea what their skin was like. They had to be told, oh, you have this type of skin. It's like, you should know. In the same way you should know, how you are best kind of being during your cycle, you should also know what your skin type is. You should know, like, where are your dry patches. So I think it's kind of the communal slowing down and actually seeing, in the week before my skin looks a certain way, in the week after, during I'm a bit You know, it's maybe not my brightest moment. And I think as a category, beauty is so reactive, but it's also so slow in so many ways. You know, we had like decades of a 3-step system, you know, cleanse, tone, moisturize, and that was it. And then people were like, an acid, I don't need a toner. Is it a 10-step routine? And people were like, oh my God, I don't know what to do anymore. So it's like, you know, it's one of the most kind of fast moving, like groundbreaking categories, but also there's, I think, quite a lot of resistance. What I always think actually is that ultimately, you know, the decision makers within retail, the buyers and merchandisers, are often women, right? Yeah. So what's always interesting to me is how there's often been quite a lot of pushback within the retail space, which I think why the growth has been in D2C, because they've been able to actually cultivate that community, probably from learned experience. Yeah. And then people are thinking about, oh my God, yeah, that's exactly the same for me. And I think, you know, if you're, you know, a forecaster and you're kind of reading these reports and seeing, you know, a D2C brand that is within this space is doing really well, then they take notice. It's always will come from D2C first.
Where overcoming the cyber censorship is so important, because the growth of beauty in D2C, if we want to mirror that in femtech, then we need to be able to say vagina, vulva. If we're getting shadow banned, then you're not going to see the same growth.
Yeah. I think Ria makes a really interesting point there, which is that the decision makers in retail, and if you go up a level, the decision makers in consumer packaged goods businesses have traditionally, over the last 50 years, been male. Yeah. So it's no surprise the products you find on your shelves and the decisions about what to list have historically been potentially not focused on products and solutions that we need. Now that is changing, the world is changing. We're seeing positive change in the kind of diversity of the people who make decisions in these big businesses. So we are starting to see that change filter through now into the types of products and services that we have on the shelf. And at the same time, we're seeing a wholesale change in the power players in the retail landscape, pushed along by the pandemic. So the digital players are much more powerful now. We've seen big high street names that we thought would be around forever are no longer here anymore. So retailers are really having to take a really hard look at, are we actually servicing the needs of the people that we're trying to sell to, and how do we bring these new customers in? So they've got to start looking at things that consumers are now saying that they want and they need. So I think it's a great time to be alive right now. It's a great time to be alive in consumer products, let me put it that way, because it's really interesting. There's a lot of change going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more before we end today's wonderful panel?
Just from a trend forecasting perspective, there are so many brands out there. I mean, myself and my co-founder Anna are both on a couple of accelerators, incubators. There's so much coming through, and I think the best thing that we can do is all come together, and I think all coming together around this cause has been really powerful. But it's a rising tide, and as much as we can support each other, I think is the way forward.
I'd just like to say, be that employer where women turn around and say, my boss, my company were amazing, because that's going to be great for your staff, but it's also going to be great for your employee brand. So,
absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's kind of like that shared experience and how we all work together is so fundamental to how this is driven and the change. Because if we can't all work on this together and kind of try and actively look for those changes we want, whether that's with cyber censorship policy or kind of speaking to retailers, to get that category space, like let's create that space together. Like we don't need to own it on our own, we want to share it with everybody. I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that can come from this, and I think we've definitely seen that kind of trend shift this year and sort of beyond. So hopefully that means it's the start of really incredible things in this space. So I guess 3 things that Rebekah touched upon at the start, that I guess the key takeaways is education. It's really, really, really important. Like we do need to be able to have this conversation with Meta. Hopefully they'll respond to that letter and I'll be there next week. But you know, that education does need to happen from school age, but also sort of up and beyond, so that this isn't a taboo subject anymore. So also we understand our bodies, so we can get the products and the solutions that we need. We need to be inspired, and I think that's thinking about, to Becky's point, like nothing is more inspiring than going to work and being like, my boss really cares about me. I feel like I work somewhere where I can be my absolute best, whatever that might be. And I think kind of like, you know, we spend so much time at work. I wasn't a dig, I wasn't saying anything. But we do, like, you know, you spend so much of your time with your work colleagues. Like, why aren't you living like your absolute, like, kind of like best opportunity there, right? So there's a huge amount of inspiration that can be done and work that can be done with policy reform and engagement. Like we're saying, like, we're all sharing these experiences. We've all kind of brands or businesses that kind of like are all related to each other. How do we now engage with buyers and retailers and kind of the giants that we need to help them create that space? You know, a big question we get, you know, we hear a lot is we love it, but where does it go? Which is why D2C is doing so well, because you're like, well, it can go here, right? Because I've created space for it. So it works right now because we're creating the space for it. So how can we work better to kind of engage those people to help them realise how important this is? So I'd really like to thank my panellists for bringing the energy and for a really great topic. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Thank you very much.